Hello, travelers and tourists. My name is Mark, and I am the local disaster tour guide. That's right, I am a storyteller that is here to encourage you to play with sharp objects. Welcome to a journey through the fantastic world of TTRPGs like Pathfinder and Starfinder, and welcome to How to Have Fun With, a new series where I'm going to be examining different classes in Pathfinder 2e to discover what aspects of the class design make that class enjoyable to play at the gaming table. Today, we're going to be talking about the fighter in Pathfinder 2e and asking what makes the fighter interesting and enjoyable when you are playing, well, a game of Pathfinder 2e. Naturally, I would love for you to be part of this conversation, so feel free to jump down to the comments section and let me know what you think makes the fighter enjoyable. And if you have any good fighter stories, be sure to share them as well. Finally, while you're down there, let me know what class you think I should cover next in this series and where you would like to see this conversation go. Now, for those of you who are unaware, my channel is in a bit of a weird period as, well, recently I lost a fight with gravity. I broke my wrist a few weeks ago, and unfortunately there was a bit of a setback last week. After the swelling went down, they did some more x-rays, and they discovered that my injury was a little bit worse than originally anticipated. And I actually ended up needing surgery on my wrist. Now, the surgery did go well, and I've gotten a lot of my range of motion back, and I've got pretty good use of my fingers. I'm pretty optimistic that my recovery is going to go well, but my healing time did get pushed back a little bit, so if you've been following the saga of old men who can't fly, that's where that stands. Hopefully somewhere around the end of March, I will be out of my cast, and I will be able to get back to my normal style of videos and normal editing of videos. I do apologize that these videos are a little bit rougher in their presentation. Still, today we're going to be discussing what makes the fighter class enjoyable to play and what you can do to, well, have some fun with the fighter at your gaming table. And I decided to start with the fighter in part because this is a class that, if you followed this channel for a while, you're probably aware I am a bit disappointed with. I generally enjoy the class design in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. I feel like Paizo has done a good job with most of the classes that they bring to the table. I think there's a lot of interesting story hooks, a lot of interesting options. I think there's a lot of different fun things you can do in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, but when it comes to the fighter, while I feel like the class is effective mechanically, it's a class that I often describe as sort of a blank canvas. There's not a lot of story hooks, there's not a lot of narrative options built into the class. They are focused pretty much essentially on combat, and that has left me with an impression of the class that is, I've shared this before, just kind of bland. So I thought it would be fun to start with the fighter because it would challenge me a little bit to really get into the class design and ask, what is it that makes the fighter enjoyable? So let's start with the obvious, and that is, a fighter's gonna fight. That's what they're here to do. It's in the name, it's very clear. The fighter's portion of play is encounter mode, when initiative is rolled, when weapons are drawn, when lives are on the line. That's when the fighter is at their best. And if you're choosing to play a fighter, you have to kind of begin with that mentality that you've chosen to lean into that aspect of play. Yes, there's other things you can do to make use of social play and exploration mode. There are things that any class can do to be involved in other aspects of the game, but the core of the fighter class is right there in the name. They are there to fight, and if you want to have fun with the fighter, you need to lean into that and really say, okay, what is it about combat and what the fighter can do in combat that makes this class enjoyable? And, well, I think the first thing worth noting about the fighter that makes them enjoyable is their incredible weapon versatility. And that might be a point that surprises you a bit. It might be strange to see me start there. Oftentimes, when people look at the fighter, they point out that fighters begin the game with expert proficiency in simple and martial weapons. And that is a better proficiency than most other classes. There are a lot of classes that begin the game with trained proficiency in simple and martial weapons, but the fighter stands out because it has expert proficiency. That's true, that is a nice bonus, but I don't want us to skip over the fact that fighters also begin play with trained proficiency in advanced weapons. You see, at the very start of the game, as soon as you roll up your fighter, as soon as you sit down for your first session, if there is a weapon available in your Pathfinder 2e game, your fighter knows how to use it. That's a pretty big deal. There are no restrictions on what you can pick up and bring to bear. If it is an option in game, if it is used to hurt people, your fighter knows how to hurt people with that thing. And I think one of the keys to having fun with the fighter is really embracing this idea that you've got a lot of room to explore all of the different weapons and all of the different weapon designs that Paizo put into this game. One of the pieces of advice I see for a lot of TTRPGs, this is a fairly common piece of advice, and normally it's a good piece of advice, but I think for the fighter it's a bit of a trap. You will usually hear new players advise when you are building your character, make sure that your character has one melee weapon and one ranged weapon. An option when you're up close and an option when you're at a distance. For a lot of characters, that's perfectly fine. Gives you a little bit of versatility, you can respond to different situations, you're good. But for the fighter, their capacity to use any weapon is really something you want to explore, because in Pathfinder 2e, the way Paizo makes weapons stand out is through the use of traits. There are a variety of different traits in this game. You have traits like deadly and reach. You have traits like agile and finesse. You have traits like backstabber. You have traits like forceful and sweep. You have all these different traits that are used to modify small things about what a weapon does and when a weapon shines. And the cool thing is, as a fighter, you can use it. Right at the start of the game, it doesn't matter what it is, it doesn't matter what traits it has, you can use it. One of the examples I gave a moment ago, I did on purpose. When I mentioned backstabber, usually when we think of weapons with the backstabber trait, we think of the rogue. And don't get me wrong, rogues do enjoy backstabber weapons, but as a fighter, you can use them too, and if you happen to be expert with that, that means you have a higher than normal chance to crit, so consider that fun little niche of the rules for a second. As a fighter, any weapon is potentially usable, meaning that any trait is potentially applicable to what you can do in combat. So, as a fighter, I think one of the big things you want to do is ask, what all can I bring with me to give me some options in the middle of this fight? Do I want to bring a reach weapon so that I can make my reactive strike more dangerous? Do I want to bring a two-handed weapon so that I have a bigger damage dice when I'm fighting a lower AC monster? Do I want to bring some agile weapons in case I've got a monster with high AC and I need to control my multiple attack penalty? There are a variety of different applications here. We don't want to dig too deep because we'll be here all day, but the general point I'm making here is, as a fighter, you can use all of these different weapons, so try them out. That is, I think, one of the fun aspects of this class. And as a little bit of a tryout bonus, just be aware as a fighter, if your enemy is using a weapon and you somehow get a hold of that weapon, odds are you're better at using it than them and you can give them a practical demonstration. Have fun with that concept. So, point number one, explore weapon versatility to really have some fun with the fighter. Building on that, point number 2, see if you can have some fun with ancestral weapons. Now, this is stepping a little bit outside of the class, but when you look at ancestry feats, pretty much every ancestry in the game has a first level ancestry feat that is going to give you access to a set of weapons that are associated with the culture of your ancestry. So here are some dwarf ancestry weapons. Here's some dwarf ancestral weapons. Here's some orc ancestral weapons, etc., etc. And weapon familiarity for those weapons is going to kind of change your proficiency and access to those weapons, which for the fighter can be a really beneficial thing. So, for example, if you have an orc ancestral weapon and it's normally an advanced weapon, ancestral weaponry is going to allow you to treat it as a martial weapon instead, moving you from trained proficiency to expert proficiency, and, well, that's going to give you a pretty unique combat niche that not a lot of other characters would get to explore. Fighters can really push ancestral weapons in some fun and exciting ways, and going back to our previous point just a bit, one of the ways Paizo helps ancestral weapons stand out is through the use of traits. Usually, ancestral weapons are not better because they are dealing more damage, rather they are better because they have some unique combination of traits that you don't normally see, and it is that unique combination of traits that makes those weapons entertaining. So, as a fighter, if you use one of your ancestry feats to pick up these weapons, you can have some unique combinations in a fight that other players might not have or might not have as easy access to, and that can be a lot of fun. So, as a fighter, explore the weapon versatility that is built into the class, and if you've got some fun ancestral weapon options, see if you can expand into that as well. I think you can have a lot of fun with that. However, when it comes to weapons, let's be honest, I've been dancing around the real selling point of the fighter, so let's go ahead and talk about crit fishing. Yes, the big selling point of the fighter that you hear in so many videos. We all know that the fighter loves to land critical hits. For your primary sets of weapons, for those simple and martial weapons, and whatever group of weapons you kind of choose to focus on as you build out your fighter, your proficiency is going to run ahead of every other class in the game by a pretty noticeable margin, and because of the plus 10, minus 10 crit system in Pathfinder, functionally what that means is you're going to land more critical hits than other people at the gaming table. I've seen this with fighters at my table. I've heard it reported from other tables. The fighter class in Pathfinder 2e is really good at landing critical hits, and what that means is you can kind of bank on that happening a little more often, and as a player, you can go crit fishing. You can explore weapons that are really enjoyable when critical hits happen. Now, there are a lot of different ways to do this. One of the basic ways to do this is to look at traits like Deadly and Fatal, which improve a weapon's damage when a critical hit lands. If you are going crit fishing, pick up a weapon that has Deadly or Fatal, and when those critical hits come, you're really going to see some fun damage spikes. Every fighter is going to have some fun with that. However, it doesn't stop there. You can also look at things like critical specializations. Essentially, for the fighter, if you have, once you get high enough level, this will kick in. If you have master proficiency with a weapon, you have access to its weapon critical specialization effect. These effects are going to vary from group to group. You might stun an enemy, you might slow an enemy, you might knock them prone, you might inflict some forced movement, you might debuff them in some fashion. There are a variety of different critical specialization effects, but all of them have the potential to be very impactful, and because you know you're going to land more critical hits, that's something you can kind of bank on. if you know that your favorite weapon is likely to knock foes prone, then you can kind of build around the idea of tormenting those poor prone foes that you're going to be creating. You can take a look at the different critical specializations that are available and ask, okay, how can I use this? How can I build around this? How can I have some fun with this concept? One that I think gets overlooked a little bit, but that I think could be a ton of fun, is the bow critical specialization, where if they are adjacent to a surface, and please remember the ground is a surface, a critical hit from that weapon can potentially pin them in place, and they have to spend an action to pull the arrow out before they can move again. There are a wide variety of options here, and the point is simply this: figure out some of the weapons you enjoy, figure out what they do on a critical hit, and then kind of build around that playstyle and ask, okay, how can I really take advantage of this? The last thing to note on the crit fishing fighter and having some fun with it is there are a lot of gear options above and beyond just a weapon that can really help you have fun with critical hits. And in particular here, I want to focus on magical property runes. There are a variety of different runes that, when applied to your weapon, if your weapon lands a critical hit, can get some kind of bonus on top of the normal damage. So for example, if you have an energy rune, it normally deals some energy damage, but if you have a greater energy rune, on a critical hit, there's some bonus effect on top of the energy damage. Another rune that is a ton of fun that I hadn't even noticed until I was researching this video, check out the Crushing and Greater Crushing rune, which just auto debuffs people on a crit. As a fighter, that is a powerful option, and that's just a couple of quick examples. Look through the different gear options you have, especially magical runes, and see what kind of bonus effects can you get that trigger on a critical hit. If your proficiency is high, you're going to land more crits than most classes, so ask yourself, how can I get the most out of those critical hits? So, those are some quick examples of combat-oriented things that I think make the fighter fun to play. But I do want to step a little bit outside of combat because there is one advantage of the fighter, and this is something I have long acknowledged that I think is worth discussing, and that is, I think the fighter is the best class in Pathfinder 2e if you are interested in archetyping. Archetyping is one of the best things in Pathfinder 2e. I honestly think it's one of the true strengths of the system. I never want to go back to multiclassing now that I have seen archetyping in effect. I think Paizo really created a strong core to the game when it added archetyping, and I think you can see how strong archetyping is in the popularity of the free archetype variant that so many tables use. But we're not talking about free archetype here, we're just talking about archetyping as normal. The way you take archetypes is you give up class feats to pick up new options from whichever archetype you might be interested in. And as a general rule in Pathfinder 2e, I feel like martial classes archetype better than caster classes because they tend to have more class feats, or at the very least more flexibility in their class feats, and this applies even more so to the fighter. The fighter starts with the advantage that martials have when it comes to class feats. They've got a healthy selection of them. But on top of that, the fighter comes with an ability called Combat Flexibility and Improved Combat Flexibility, which are essentially bonus class feats you get to pick out every day. So, at high levels, the fighter functionally has 2 more class feats than normal, meaning that the opportunity cost of archetyping is the least for the fighter. There are a ton of fun archetypes, and I'm not going to dive into all of them. There's weapon archetypes, there's playstyle archetypes. I think the martial is a really good option that meshes well with the fighter. There's a ton of directions you could go with this conversation because Paizo has produced a lot of really good archetypes for this game. But regardless of which archetype you're discussing, when it comes to the fighter, the overall opportunity cost to take an archetype is just lower than any other class, and that means that the fighter can step into these other archetypes, gain these extra abilities that are not a normal part of their class, and still function as pretty much a full-fledged character on their own. By the way, this is a whole nother conversation we don't have time for, but never forget retraining rules are core in Pathfinder 2e, meaning that as a fighter, you can retrain your class feats for whatever weapons you're using that day, and then have these archetype benefits on top of that. Fighters archetype really, really well. Way back earlier in this video, I talked about how I feel like the fighter is a bland class compared to some of the other classes, and I still have that criticism, but one of the good things about a blank canvas is you have a ton of freedom in what you create. So, another way you can have a lot of fun with the fighter, and maybe give them some options outside of combat, is to consider taking an archetype and using that to expand what your character can do. But those are some of my thoughts on how to have fun when you're playing a fighter in Pathfinder 2e. The time has come for me to turn the conversation over to you. What are your thoughts about the fighter and the fighter's class design, and what makes the fighter enjoyable at the gaming table? Jump down to the comments section, let me know your thoughts about what makes the fighter stand out and makes it enjoyable to play. I'd love to hear your thoughts. As I mentioned earlier, let me know what you think of this series concept, and let me know which class you would like me to cover next. And don't forget to do all the other stuff that helps to support the channel. If you enjoyed this content, please remember to like, share, and subscribe. I look forward to hearing from you all. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for being part of the conversation. Have a wonderful day.